I've got a lot of friends who are Democrats, and they haven't asked me for advice, but if I did, I'd tell them, look, you just got to try harder not to suck. I mean, think about it. Over the past 4 years, the Democrats mismanaged Congress, they mismanaged the economy, they mismanaged inflation, they mismanaged the national debt. More recently, in their opposition to President Trump and Mr. Musk, the Democrats have chosen to support the bureaucrats and the spending porn over the American taxpayer, just like they support illegal immigration over the rule of law.
Now, the New York Times is saying Biden's gaffes complicate Harris's final stretch, worrying Democratic insiders. Are these gaffes or are they something else here, Senator?
Laura, one of the most bizarre things I've seen in this campaign, you'll probably remember it, I think it was after the first hurricane. Vice President Harris jumped all over Governor DeSantis. She said he was playing politics, wasn't distributing aid quickly enough, and she wanted to help. Now, in fairness to Harris, maybe she did want to help, and Governor DeSantis wouldn't tell her where Florida is. But that notwithstanding, in the middle of all of that, President Biden jumped right into the conversation, and he said, Governor DeSantis is doing a great job. And I thought that was bizarre. What it told me was that, among other things, President Biden is angry. I mean, think about it. His party dumped him like he's a passing fad. They made him watch the convention in a dumpster behind the convention center. We know he has neurodegenerative disease, and I'm sorry about that. That's why he talks sometimes like he's from outer space. But his anger, to me, has come through, and the things he has done, they have hurt Vice President Harris. Now, he also, I happen to believe, believes them. I think President Biden thinks that people who disagree with him, they're not just wrong, they're bad. They're racist and ignorant and fools and, in his word, garbage. So do many of the elitist Democrats, certainly the members of the Moon Wing. I've seen these folks. You ought to see it from the inside. These folks hate George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head, and they think kids should be able to change gender at recess, and they really think cops are a bigger problem than criminals. And I think President Biden really is sincere. He thinks people are garbage who disagree with him. And it does hurt our Vice President Harris. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they just left President Biden unsupervised, and they won't do it again before Tuesday. But it changed this election.
Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. You know, with 53 senators, it's hard for me to imagine there would be many people that wouldn't be able to get confirmed and would need recess appointments, sir.
We're going to get President Trump's nominees confirmed. President Biden has some people, not all, but many of them in important positions that frankly are meatheads. And we need to get them out of there and get President Trump's people in. And I don't anticipate that being a problem.
Mm-hmm. Do you think one particular senator would be a better leader in this Congress than another?
There's an official-looking document floating around the internet that supposedly says, here's how every Republican senator would vote, and here's who he or she would vote for Senate Majority Leader. And in an unprecedented act of selflessness, it has Senator Thune actually voting against himself and for Senator Cornyn. If you think this list is real or accurate, then you probably think that Elvis is alive and running a small bait stand on Lake Erie. We haven't even had a meeting yet to hear the formal proposals from the three nominees about how, if at all, they will run things differently than Senator McConnell. economy. Here's what I know. We will pick a leader who will advance President Trump's agenda. We saw what everybody else saw on Tuesday night. Despite what the so-called experts in Washington say, with their NPR tote bags and their organic broccoli, this was a really simple message from the people. Republicans aren't perfect, but the other side is crazy. And President Trump is going to do things differently, and we will pick a leader who will help him do that.
I wanted to ask you about this because the Associated Press called the Senate race in Pennsylvania for Dave McCormick, the Republican. Chuck Schumer and Bob Casey are not accepting that. What kind of game is Schumer playing here?
Dana, my thought was clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Senator Schumer has a fatal attraction sometimes to nutty ideas, and this is one of those times. What he's doing is petty. I know he's disappointed in the election, but he needs to go file a hurt feelings report, and let's move on. Dave McCormick should be able to attend orientation.
Democrats are getting some interesting advice, one of which is to have President Biden step down and appoint Kamala Harris the first woman, 47th president of the United States. This was floating out there all last week. Justice Sonia Sotomayor is expected to remain on the Supreme Court, she says. Some liberal activists, call for number 2, guys, have called for the 70-year-old Obama appointee to retire before Trump can fill her seat. She's got a vote in that issue, too, Senator.
All these people floating these ideas, they're all coming out of Washington, from the D.C. permanent Washington type. You know, they need to put down the gummies. The American people have spoken. We're going to have a new government. We're in the process of putting together that government, and everybody needs to just take a deep breath and relax. I understand these experts have to earn a living, but some of the things they're proposing it's just cell deep stupid. And the American people know that. You would think they would have learned that the American people may not read Aristotle every day, but they can figure things out pretty quickly.
Put down the gummies. I love it.
It's been a minute since we've had a chance to talk to you, and get ready for interesting times. I know you will be. Thank you, sir.
Your thoughts on Speaker McCarthy today and his formalization of this impeachment inquiry?
I think the Speaker and Chair Jordan and Chair Comer have done an incredible job. I mean, look what we've learned. We know that Mr. Hunter Biden was either selling influence or selling the appearance of influence. We know Mr. Hunter Biden, as a result of that, at best, he's a sleazebag. At worst, he's a thief. Number 2, we know that President Biden was well aware of what his son was doing. When President Biden said, "I've never discussed business with my son, and I have no idea what he's doing," the president was lying. Number 3, as a result of the House Republicans' effort, we know that President Biden not only was aware of what his son was doing, but he aggressively enabled it. Now, those are the facts. Is it enough for an impeachment proceeding, or do they need to gather more facts? That's up to the House. But if you're asking me where I think this leads, I think it leads to an impeachment. I realize that President Biden has his side of the story, and as best I can tell, what the White House's argument is that President Biden is just a good family man who talks to 6 of his 7 grandchildren every day, and he's such a swell father that he calls in regularly to his son's business meetings to talk about the weather. But nobody believes that.
And gives them all their own small business LLCs, Senator Kennedy, and puts money into those LLCs, which somehow seem to, I'm going to say, dribble up to then Vice President Biden and who knows what nowadays. I mean, you're right. He's a wonderful grandfather, except for that kid down in the Ozarks who we won't acknowledge.
Well, this whole thing with Mr. Hunter Biden, secretly, President Biden has got to be embarrassed. I mean, this whole thing it reeks of privilege. It reeks of influence peddling. It reeks of sleaze. And I'm grateful that the House got the facts, and they're going to keep going.
Let me move on. 9/11, so Joe Biden doesn't go to any of the memorials. He's in Alaska. By the way, spitting in the face of Alaskan oil, no oil and gas drilling. We'll get to that in a minute. We learn that the State Department puts together this deal, some kind of hostage swap, and winds up unfreezing $6 billion to Iran. $6 billion, a lot of money. Iran is broke and needs every nickel it can find. We've already already allowed them high oil prices. Now we're giving them $6 billion. What do you think about this?
First, I know President Biden didn't make the 9/11 ceremony, but to be fair, he's busy. He did send the vice president. But to answer your question, everyone has the right to be stupid now and then. But for the last 2 years, President Biden has abused the privilege. And this latest deal that he made with Iran is sort of the cherry on top. How can I put this? More sheep is not going to solve the wolf problem. The only thing that has ever gotten Iran's attention were the sanctions, and they're not strong enough. And if President Biden wants to, he can ratchet those sanctions down, whether our so-called allies in Europe support us or not. He doesn't want to do that because he thinks that if he gives the Ayatollah in Iran a hug and a good hot cup of cocoa, that President Biden can win him over. And that's nonsense. I mean, that's weakness invites the wolves, and the Ayatollah is a wolf. Peace through weakness has never worked.
Iran is part of OPEC Plus. Oil prices are going back towards $100 a barrel in the world market. Gasoline prices are going back up to $4 nationwide. OPEC cuts production or extends its production. That's Iran, Venezuela, along with the Saudis and the Russians. And Joe Biden's response, sir, is to freeze drilling in Alaska and to freeze drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, violating the law because they're congressional mandates, legislated mandates for a lot of these lease sales. Biden's, I don't know which side he's on. What's going on here?
Well, President Biden is on the side of the teleprompter. His policy is whatever that teleprompter says it is. I'm sorry to have to say that, but it's true. As best I can tell by his deeds, if not his words, the president's new energy policy in terms of fossil fuels is, look, let's give up America's energy independence.
Right.
And instead of producing our own oil, let's buy oil at higher prices from nations that hate us, so those nations will have more money to buy weapons to try to kill us. And it just makes absolutely no sense. Point two, President Biden is violating the law. Congress passed a law. I was there and voted on it to open up drilling in ANWR. It will not hurt the environment. The area that we're drilling on in ANWR in Alaska, imagine this. Imagine a football field. Put a stamp in the middle of the field on the 50-yard line. That's the area on which the oil and gas industry will drill. The entire football field is ANWR. The polar bears are safe. President Biden is violating the law by not following Congress's directive.
And the natives want the jobs.
Of course.
The natives want the job, but the other one is in the Gulf of Mexico, down your way. All right,
Yes.
There are lease sales that were legislated by Congress that Biden has overturned. This guy's breaking the law once again, just like he's breaking the law regarding student loan cancellations. He's breaking the Supreme Court decision. There's a pattern of corruption here, to use Speaker McCarthy's phrase.
Well, President Biden, I think it's just a fact. You see it. I see it. The American people see it. There are two wings of the Democratic Party, and one of them is called the loon wing. Some might say the woke wing. That's the wing that President Biden has embraced. And part of the loon wing's agenda is to get rid of all fossil fuels, all petrochemicals. We're going to live solely on wind and solar power. And as I have said before, I'll say it again, my car does not run on unicorn urine or fairy dust. It's a totally unrealistic view of the world, and President Xi and the Ayatollah and Vladimir Putin and the folks in Cuba and Venezuela, they're laughing at him. They're laughing at America. They're saying we don't have to fire a shot at you guys. Y'all are just destroying yourselves. And we need a change. I've said this before too, Larry, and I mean it. The water's not going to clear up till you get the pigs out of the creek. That's true in Washington.
I was interested in your wolf and sheep. I think it was in the 1952 or 53 election. Churchill told Clement Attlee, "You're a sheep in sheep's clothing."
Sheep's clothing. I remember that.
Meaning you're a socialist, and everybody knows you're a socialist, and nobody wants socialism. A lot of economists now are saying that because of Biden's open borders, sir, letting in illegal migrants and then giving them some kind of work permit, one of the consequences of that is to lower the wages of American workers. workforce. And that's becoming a more and more serious problem. What you think about that one?
The truth is the labor markets are relaxing a little bit. They're not as tight as they were. And if that is the case, then handing out those work permits could depress wages for everybody else. But the fact of the matter is that the Biden administration, whether you agree or disagree with the policy, they're breaking the law. I mean, it's illegal to sneak in our country, and if you get caught, you're supposed to be deported. And President Biden just says, no, come on in. If you're a Democrat in today's Democratic Party, you're not allowed to fire bad employees, to fire bad teachers. You're not allowed to deport illegal immigrants. You're not allowed to oppose MS-13. You're not allowed to like cops. You're not allowed to prosecute thieves who steal less than $950. You're not allowed to oppose sex change operations for minors or transgender people in women's bathrooms or playing women's sports. You're not allowed to oppose critical race theory in our schools. You're not allowed to oppose reading porn to grade schoolers. You're not allowed to oppose racial quotas, but you are required to use certain pronouns and to believe that men can breastfeed. Now, I don't think I'm being unfair. This is what Democrats and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez now believe. And a charitable interpretation for this kind of behavior does not exist. And the American people look at it and they just want to jump out of a moving car. And that's why Democrats are polling right up there with scalp psoriasis. That's what I mean when I say they're deeply weird. Our Republican secret plan for dealing with the Democrats is called Operation Let Them Speak. But that's good for our party, but it's bad for America. And I think Schumer did the right thing.
Do you think he might be deposed? Do you think that he might be challenged? Do you think that somebody might challenge his leadership?
No. That's
Okay.
what's, you've heard me say this before. If it wasn't for double standards in Washington, there wouldn't be any standards at all. Most Democrats in the Senate supported what Schumer did, and they're scared of him. Whatever Schumer says, generally speaking, they just moo and follow him into the chute like cattle. And I don't think that'll change. I double dog dare one of them to take him on and see what happens. He'll cut him off like a dead stump. Tariffs are like whiskey. A little whiskey under the right circumstances can be refreshing. Too much whiskey under the wrong circumstances, and you end up drunk as a goat. We just don't know right now.
Chuck's days may be numbered, just like Jimmy Kimmel.
Sean, I don't hate anybody. That includes Senator Schumer. He's very smart. On the other hand, Chuck's often wrong. He never makes the same mistake twice. He makes it 5 or 6 times just to be sure. But this time he got it right in supporting our efforts to keep government open. Unless a football coach taught you history, you understand that shutting government down never achieves anything. It just scares people, especially the elderly. Having said that, many Democrats are angry at Schumer. Among them right now, we've all seen the news. He's about as popular as chlamydia. But that to me says as much about the Democratic Party as it does about Senator Schumer. What it tells me is that the loon wing of the Democratic Party is firmly in control. Now that's great for the Republican Party, but it's bad for America. These people are deeply weird. For example, no honest person whose IQ is above his age doesn't believe that biological sex doesn't exist, but they do. That's what I mean when I say they're deeply weird. Our Republican secret plan for dealing with the Democrats is called Operation Let Them Speak. but that's good for our party, but it's bad for America. And I think Schumer did the right thing.
You know, I've never been as afraid of government shutdowns because it always ends the same way. They end up opening the government, and people that do get furloughed end up getting a paid vacation in the end, paid leave. And we never take away essential services. The military keeps defending our country. Social Security checks keep going out. Other essential services, continue. So it never quite it becomes the doom and gloom that people predict it to be. But with that said, I don't think the Democrats had much leverage here. We're still living under the Biden-Harris budget, are we not? This is still their economy, is it not?
Well, yes, but we fixed it as best we could. For example, in this particular budget, we added $6 billion for defense spending. We cut $13 billion from non-defense discretionary spending. It's a lesser amount of spending than last year or the year before, but it wasn't our budget. It was the Democrats' budget. And Schumer kept it off the Senate floor. That's the reason we were in this position. Schumer kept it off the Senate floor, so we had to do a CR. I don't mean to sound so geeky here, but that's what happened. This was all Senator Schumer's fault. But as I said, this to me says more about the Democratic Party today than it does about Senator Schumer.
Well, let me ask you, Senator, do you think he might be deposed? Do you think that he might be challenged? Do you think that somebody might challenge his leadership?
No. That's
okay.
what's, you've heard me say this before. If it wasn't for double standards in Washington, there wouldn't be any standards at all. Most Democrats in the Senate supported what Schumer did, and they're scared of him. Whatever Schumer says, generally speaking, they just moo and follow him into the chute like cattle. And I don't think that'll change. I double dog dare one of them to take him on and see what happens. He'll cut him off like a dead stump.
The one thing I'll say is Democrats usually circle the wagons and Republicans create circular firing squads. This is the one time I think roles have reversed, hopefully permanently so. I think Donald Trump had a big part to play in that.
Let me address first your question about dark woke. I think the Democrats are trying to appear more manly. Just a thought, but they may want to consider first getting rid of their man purses and their organic broccoli. Dark woke, light woke, mellow yellow woke, it's still woke, and that's the Democrats' problem. If you believe the polls, Jason, most Americans believe that Republicans aren't perfect, but they think the other side's crazy. They think that Democrats, like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, have chosen to become utter nutters. I mean, you think about it, and think about what the Congresswoman stands for. Ready? Here is President Biden's energy policy in a nutshell. First, we're going to stop producing our own oil. Then we're going to buy oil from foreign countries that hate us, so those foreign countries can have more money to buy weapons to try to kill us. Sometimes I think President Biden is more concerned about the best cure for toenail fungus than he is about saving American jobs. Someone, please tell the Commander-in-Chief that neither my car nor the greatest economy in all of human history runs on fairy dust and unicorn urine.
Are you confident that Musk is doing this for the reasons that President Trump says, purely to help this country, purely to reduce the deficit, and not in any way to help his American-based companies?
Yes, and I will tell you, his work for President Trump has cost him a lot of money. I think Mr. Musk is doing it because money is important to him, but other things are more important. I think he'd like to leave something behind besides styrofoam. I think that I am a supporter. He's done more in a few weeks than I've seen anybody else do in 8 years up here. I don't think anybody should be surprised. Trump said he was going to scrub the budget. He's scrubbing the budget. That needs to be done for two reasons. First, there's a moral principle we shouldn't be wasting people's money. But number two, if we don't scrub this budget, we're never going to get prices down. In order to get prices down, we're going to have to reduce our federal spending. That'll lower interest rates and stimulate the economy less. We're going to have to deregulate the economy. Hadn't been talked about much, but it's a big part of reducing the cost of goods and services. And we're going to have to design a tax code that looks like somebody designed the damn thing on purpose. And that's what we're planning on doing with our reconciliation bill. If we do those three things, we'll get these high prices down. They need to put down the gummies. The American people have spoken. We're going to have a new government. We're in the process of putting together that government, and everybody needs to just take a deep breath and relax. I understand these experts have to earn a living, but some of the things they're proposing it's just cell deep stupid. And the American people know that. You would think they would have learned that the American people may not read Aristotle every day, but they can figure things out pretty quickly.
It sounds like you're leaving the door open to the possibility that you could ultimately at some point support an increase in taxes if you thought it was the best way to get that budget bill over the finish line?
Well, we're in the process of putting the bill together. And here's what will probably happen. The House and the Senate will spend about, I don't know, hopefully no more than 60 days trying to reach a consensus. Everything's on the table. We won't reach a consensus. And then we'll have to go to the White House and meet with the president. And after a few hugs and a cup of hot cocoa, the president will arbitrate here and say this is in and this is out. And then he's going to have to put his muscle behind it to pass it. But this bill's important. It's our way of lowering prices. You lower prices by cutting spending, by deregulating the economy, and by designing a tax code that looks like somebody designed it on purpose in a way that stimulates growth so wages go up.
Senator,
And that's my objective in all this. I listened to my friend on another network, Willie Geist, this morning predict raging inflation. Now, I know Mr. Geist is smart and well-educated because he went to Vanderbilt, but that's just a wag. That's a wild-ass guess. China has huge trade barriers. They don't have inflation. They've got deflation. Many Democrats are angry at Schumer. Among them right now, we've all seen the news. He's about as popular as chlamydia. That, to me, says as much about the Democratic Party as it does about Senator Schumer. What it tells me is that the loon wing of the Democratic Party is firmly in control. Now, that's great for the Republican Party, but it's bad for America. These people are deeply weird.
the Justice Department called the deportation of Mr. Abrego Garcia a, quote, administrative error. The Supreme Court has ordered the government to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. Should Mr. Abrego Garcia be returned to the United States, Senator?
Chris is my friend, and I respect him, and he's certainly entitled to his opinion, but in my judgment, he is utterly and gloriously wrong. I mean, most of this gauzy rhetoric is just rage bait. Unless you're next level obtuse, you know that Mr. Garcia is never coming back to the United States, ever. And that's not because of President Trump. That's because of President Bukele. He said up front in the Oval Office that he was not going to return Mr. Garcia. No federal judge, even Jay Wilkinson, has authority over a sovereign country. Besides that, it should not go unnoticed that Mr. Bukele is much closer to President Xi in China than he is to President Trump. Xi is spending billions of dollars to build infrastructure in El Salvador, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've discussed this case. The final point I would make, whether you agree with it or not, is Bukele hates MS-13.
The trade tariffs, being completely reciprocal, it's not just how much they are tariffing us, it's whether we have a trade imbalance, and they have worked that into the equation of how much our tariffs against other countries should be. Should we remove that part of it and just do tariff to tariff?
Well, if you go to zero tariffs and you still have a trade surplus or trade deficit, as the case may be, that's the market saying we prefer these goods and our services at this price as opposed to others. And I think that's free enterprise. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We do have trade deficits in goods with many countries. But with respect to many countries, we have a trade surplus in services. That is a good thing. I think where the president's headed, I hope so, is to reduce tariffs and stop other countries from taking advantage of us. Now, China's a different story.
Yes.
I'm taking China out of the equation for now.
That's really the mother's milk of the Republican Party, is dealing with taxes which are a craw in the throat of virtually every American, particularly at this time of the year. From 1981 to 1987, the great Ronald Reagan lowered taxes from 70% ultimately down to 28%. As a result of that, we ended up with 7 very fat, good years for our economy until George H. Bush broke his no-tax pledge and raised taxes, and of course he lost the election. Well, now there's some rhinos, I call them rhinos, maybe I'm impolite in doing so, but going against the Republican trait of cutting taxes, saying we should raise taxes. Is this a gift to Democrats despite their best efforts to shoot themselves in the foot?
5,000 years of human experience demonstrates that when you tax something, you get less of it. There is some discussion, some rhetoric, as we put together a reconciliation bill about raising taxes on certain folks, primarily the so-called rich. I'm not a big believer in envy taxes. I don't believe in making tax policy on the basis of class warfare. I hope we don't do that. I spent 4 years under President Biden, where all he wanted to do, along with my Democratic friends, was talk about who ought to be paying more in taxes.
Right.
I'm tired of that. The real issue is what the hell happened to the money, and how can we get this economy growing again? That's one person's opinion. I may be wrong, but I doubt it.
There are a lot of countries out there who want to make a deal with us right now. Thank goodness they do, as many as 70 total. Do we have enough people to do that? It's a pretty complicated process when you're working with 2 or even 1 like China. But with all these others, are there enough folks to be doing it in time for the economy to get moving?
Yes, and here's why, in my opinion, we need to do it. Except with respect to countries that are trying to hurt you. The only good tariff is a dead tariff. Tariffs are government intervention. With a tariff, a government puts its thumb on the scale. That interferes with people's freedom to freely exchange goods and services. Now, we all know that many countries throughout the world use tariffs and trade barriers to hurt the American economy and the American people. President Trump said he had enough. He said, if you raise your tariffs, I'm going to raise mine. And then an astounding thing happened. Instead of these countries bowing up and fighting us, they said, well, let's make a deal. Let's lower our tariffs. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now. And I think we ought to lower tariffs, except with respect to countries that hate us and are trying to hurt us. I've been preaching for 2 weeks on the Senate floor, saying I don't want to be at war with Canada. I love Canada. The people of Canada are great. Let's both go to zero tariffs. Competition makes us all better, and let the best product at the best price win. Well, that's where I hope the president's headed.
The trade tariffs, being completely reciprocal, it's not just how much they are tariffing us, it's whether we have a trade imbalance, and they have worked that into the equation of how much our tariffs against other countries should be. Should we remove that part of it and just do tariff to tariff?
Well, if you go to zero tariffs and you still have a trade surplus or trade deficit, as the case may be, that's the market saying we prefer these goods and our services at this price as opposed to others. And I think that's free enterprise. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We do have trade deficits in goods with many countries. But with respect to many countries, we have a trade surplus in services. That is a good thing. I think where the president's headed, I hope so, is to reduce tariffs and stop other countries from taking advantage of us. Now, China's a different story.
Yes.
I'm taking China out of the equation for now.
If the countries in Asia, as well as the countries in Europe, are isolated from trade with China, won't China have to come running to us to make a deal?
Yes, and eventually China will make a deal. It doesn't have a choice. Its economy is on a journey to the ocean floor. They're an export economy. We buy 4 or 5 times more Chinese stuff than they buy American stuff. So we can wait them out. Now, it hurts both sides. But President Xi knows in his heart and in his head, well, if he has a heart, he knows in his head that he's going to have to make a deal sooner or later.
We can get a lot more oil very responsibly out of the Gulf of Mexico, as much as 2 million more barrels a day out of the Gulf of America, forgive me, than we are getting now.
President Biden, 625 million acres he tried to wipe off of offshore drilling opportunities. And through this mapping exercise, 23% increase in the potential just in one part of the Gulf of America. And as you say, billions of barrels of potential down there. And this is all going to help, again, make energy affordable and provide national security for America.
So could those permits all be done by the executive power, or would the Senate and the Congress come in and, as usual, make a mess of things?
I'd like to have belt and suspenders. The executive branch has a lot of authority, but I'd like to see Congress act. It'll be difficult because many of my Democratic friends just don't like fossil fuels. I think that's unrealistic, as I've said before. We have to have fossil fuels in the greatest economy in all of human history. My car doesn't run off pixie dust and unicorn urine. The oil and gas is in the Gulf, but there's one precondition. You've got to drill for it. And President Biden and his woke mafia wouldn't let us drill. And they wouldn't let us import, or rather export LNG either, for that matter.
And by the way, electric cars have to get their energy from someplace too, and usually it comes from fossil fuels.
I've been preaching for 2 weeks on the Senate floor, saying I don't want to be at war with Canada. I love Canada. People in Canada are great. Let's both go to zero tariffs. Competition makes us all better, and let the best product at the best price win.
If the countries in Asia, as well as the countries in Europe, are isolated from trade with China, won't China have to come running to us to make a deal?
Yes, and eventually China will make a deal. It doesn't have a choice. Its economy is on a journey to the ocean floor. They're an export economy. We buy 4 or 5 times more Chinese stuff than they buy American stuff. So we can wait them out. Now, it hurts both sides. But President Xi knows in his heart and in his head, well, if he has a heart, he knows in his head that he's going to have to make a deal sooner or later.